Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show that never ends, the CRMKonvos discussions, conversations about cool, empathic, interesting, and sometimes really challenging topics. Today, we have done a fantastic show preparation with our expert on GDPR and everything which has to do with what's around security. Welcome, Michael, again in our, let's say, living room or in front of the screens of our audience. And I'm very pleased that you could make it. And in these days where security breaches are the standard news of the day, that you have taken the time to be with us and not with your nervous customers or nervous potential customers, which are seeking for the savior and the hero of their data. Michael, would you mind to introduce yourself a bit in your roles you had in former business lives and what you are doing right now?
Well, thank you, Ralph, for those warm words. I'm speechless now after that introduction. First time that I've been called a savior, but hey, let's found a religion and see how rich we can get. No, I've been working in the data privacy industry and IT security industry now for the majority of the last 24 years. Anniversary is coming up next year. Worked for a large US security software company for a long time. Then I was running a startup in Switzerland, taking care of cloud security. And recently, last year in November, I switched gears and I'm now the head of data privacy and protection for Germany, Austria, Switzerland for CyberRes, a micro-focus line of business.
You see us speechless. That doesn't happen often, especially not with Ralph.
We've got someone on the show who actually does something for a living.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
But with that, then let's dig right into medias res, as we would say in German.
That's Latin, actually.
Yeah, well, sometimes we pretend to be educated. Happens even in Germany. But, well, security, privacy, that smells a hell of a lot like CCPA, GDPR, and the likes. What's the state of these laws and the state of implementation of these laws in your experience?
It depends, right? I mean, you just made the global sum up of this is all the different regulations. Fun piece is actually it all started basically with the German law on data privacy that was mainly influencing then GDPR, and GDPR became kind of the copy and paste thing for all kind of other regulations. Like many of the US states have now their data privacy legislations, Brazil, Turkey, you name it. All of them are coming up with these legislations.
Would I be a Brit, I would have make the sound here, 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 like in Parliament, when instead of applauding, such as you are just, quote, giving us the information that it is used like a blueprint. It's an export article now.
It's an export article, but what I prefer is when export articles are the gold standard in their home countries as well, right? And discussions I had over the past years were actually showing that companies in the US were by far faster in implementing their GDPR measurements and countermeasures and everything compared to companies in Germany. In Germany, still companies believe, well, let's write a concept paper for the day when the auditor returns for the next time, show the concept paper, and the auditor will say, that reads well. I wish you good luck in implementing it, and I'll see you in 2 years from now, and then we'll have a review on what you did. So implementation of GDPR processes and everything that comes with it are slowly progressing. I guess one of the key things that I'm observing these days is that the first customers are starting to raise their data subject access requests. And that is actually bringing most companies to the end of their wisdom. If I raise a request, and I did this for fun just a couple of times with some companies, within days, sometimes within 1 day, you get a proper response on, this is what we know about Michael Hose in our CRM system, yada, 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 that's where we have it stored, and if you want us to delete it, we can do that, right? But what they completely ignore is dozens of emails that we exchange that are stored on mail servers, on backup servers, all kind of documents that we exchanged. In one case, it was a building company, and we exchanged all kind of plans. And they never mentioned that anywhere, right? All they do is a snapshot of that is what we have in the CRM system, and that's it. And I'm currently in probably a dozen of projects where companies started to investigate where toxic data is. So you have all of this lovely infrastructure on-premise and in the cloud, where you have all kind of hundreds of years of data stored, all legacy data. You never delete. It's all gatherers and hunters. That's what we all are.
Yeah.
And then you have to find that specific piece of information that relates to, in my case, Michael Hose, to be able to provide that answer sufficiently, right? And it's real fun. I'm doing a couple of these projects at the moment where we start with kind of first step doing ROT management. Ever heard of that term?
Lot management?
ROT management, redundant, obsolete, trivial. So redundant, we'll find all of the documents that are duplicate, right? That Excel sheet that the colleagues sent me that I really liked and copied it, and other colleagues liked it, and one Excel sheet is stored 500 times all of a sudden. Obsolete, everything that is outdated, right? Depending on country, like in Germany, 10 years, you need to keep invoices for tax reasons, and then you can delete them, but they are never deleted. And then trivial, all those cat videos, MP3 collections and stuff that we store on corporate storage. And it turns out, depending on company, depending on department, it's 30 to 50% of the data that can be eliminated without any loss. And then the real work starts of identifying what data do I really have, and where is data that is related to individuals, for example, for data subject access requests.
Can we go back to the part where you're deleting cat videos? Because I don't think I'm okay with that.
I didn't want to hurt any feelings, Marshall, but there's also an option to archive them securely.
Okay. I feel better now. Thank you.
Why is that, Michael? That, I mean, this thing is in force since May 18. And it has been there already for 2 years.
Yeah, it's why the
time I actually, as a member of a consultant company, we had an offering in place that helped them, should have helped them if they had taken it up, to identify their deficiencies and to implement procedures to overcome them. Positively, I have no idea. Positively said, the take-up was zero.
If you have a kid, you tell kids, don't touch the oven, it's hot, right? You may burn your fingers. And you can tell that as often as you want until the kid has hit that hot surface, right? Same thing. When safety belts have been invented and built into cars, it took a legislation and permanent control until people really understood the value of a safety belt. And if the value was only, I don't need to pay the fine. But how much controls do we have? How many police officers are controlling proper GDPR compliance of companies, right? No one. The large corporations with their permanent audits, they are mostly sorted to a degree. Mid-sized companies, like family-owned mid-sized companies in Germany, I even met a couple of family-owned companies that said, well, we'll take the risk. Like in the past, with the original German data privacy regulation, the maximum fine was 300k euro. So they deposited 300k euro on a bank account. Right? Now the fines are slightly higher in some cases, but they believe they can still get away with, if we collaborate once we have an incident with investigation officers and what have you, then we'll get away with it. Right? And some of the examples actually showed that some of the early cases that worked properly together with investigation officers and courts and all kind of legal people, they got away with a far lower fine. In some cases, instead of 100 million, 10 million, for example, and even the 10 million have been reduced to 100k. So it looks like you're getting away with it.
So now, well, they are getting away with it. Let me share something which we share screen, window, share a window, Bob.
While he's sharing that, I will ask, it may have looked like they're getting away with it, but was this in addition to changing their practices so these incidents wouldn't occur again? Or was it more the case that they would cooperate, lower the fine, but still be doing business as usual?
Yeah, good point. So proper run companies have taken an approach where they actively start to follow GDPR processes.
Right.
Left, right, and center. From how you get to a reception of such a company and fill in your name and everything, and you have to acknowledge their privacy policies, how they handle cookies on their website, how they deal with data subject access requests, all of that. Those that ignore everything tend to have something like a plan B in their pocket, which is, in case we have an issue, we can still come up with plan B, and plan B is, we already plan to implement all of that. They do only the obvious stuff. They do the obvious stuff at the reception and on their website, but not in their data centers.
Yeah.
Oh, now that I found it, so 2021, 887 million for Amazon.
Yeah, only 6 weeks ago.
I mean, they was a few weeks ago, or was a month ago now. So apart from it not being really in effect right now, because still disputed by Amazon, of course, why does it for these big showcases? You can add probably Microsoft, you can add the FANG companies, Facebook, Apple, Netflix, Google, all of them, they are probably all doing the same, especially Google. They are, as Amazon, they are doing their business based upon your and my data. So why is it so hard to even tackle the big ones? Not talking about the mid-sized companies, the SMBs, but the big ones, to create showcases, to create an example.
Well, the big ones have a big legal department. And if you come up with a case like that, you need to have really, really, really waterproof arguments to win a case like that. There has been one case with a lot of proof that was reduced from 1 billion down to, I think, in the range of 20 million, which was British Airways. And that was because the court said, when we started the investigation, there was nothing like COVID. But now with COVID, you already have been punished enough, and therefore only 20 million is something that is okay for.
Quite a poor excuse, but anyways.
Yeah, I would love to see the logic behind that.
Sorry, Marshall?
I would love to understand the logic behind that.
Yeah.
COVID has punished you enough. Yeah, it's punished everybody enough. That punishment got shared around. It's not special.
Well, the air travel industry was one of the most suffering industries, right? But hey, let's not go there.
Do
But
you see the
well,
tears
I mean,
on my face?
Yeah. And I can help you wipe them off. No worries.
You're well prepared.
I'm always prepared, right? No, I mean, the reality is that we have like 9 penalties that are above 10 million, where Google got a 50 million penalty in France. H&M, a clothing shop, got a 35 million euro fine in Germany. There is significant cases, but they are just at the top end. I guess the early years now, the first years, were used more for educational purposes to make everyone aware. You're not coming away, you have to pay a penalty. The majority of penalties is between a couple of hundred to a couple of thousand euro. But if you repeat your behavior, second time we catch you, you will have a major problem.
Why this grace period? I mean, it was known 4 years in advance what's going to happen, that the switch gets flicked on May, what was it, 27, 2018?
Well, most organizations run their IT and their processes now for a couple of decades, right? So changing all of that into a everything compliant reality is a task. I'm not saying it's impossible, but there are countries that have a longer standing history in compliance topics. Mm-hmm. Like the US customers that I've been talking to were faster in implementing GDPR than the majority of the German customers. And the reason for that is compliance and achieving compliance is a topic that has been around in the US for, Marshall, you know it better than myself, but is it 30 years, 40 years? In IT?
Yeah. I would say so.
And we have been partially reluctant to adhere to all of those compliance regulations, right? And we didn't have them, and they were not too much enforced, etc., etc. So now they are enforced. And what I think is more important is that companies start to understand the importance of running their IT in a way that is focused around protecting the business and the people. GDPR takes care of the privacy aspect of individuals, and the next regulation that is down the road, aiming for 2023 at the moment, is the Digital Operational Resilience Act, DORA. And that is just the next step, because if you see what happens today, where companies operate in hybrid mode, on-premise stuff, cloud stuff in between, and start to lose control over their own IT assets, especially by moving to the cloud, it is more and more important that you think about how you protect your business, how you make your business more resilient to operate in such an environment. And that's a huge learning curve that all organizations have to go through. And like you shared the Amazon example, the other example is the vulnerability called Chaos DB, where Microsoft Azure's Cosmos database was open for read, write, and delete access to an attacker through a vulnerability, right? And a couple of thousand customers were affected, a couple of billion records were affected. And that's the reality that we have to face. And that's where data protection is one part of the equation, but the other part is really, how do I make my IT, even when it is no longer under my direct control, more resilient to all of those things?
Looking at it from a slightly different angle, so it looks like that many companies are seeing privacy or protecting their customers and employees' privacy as a problem. What would you say to the argument that they can use that as an advantage, as a competitive advantage?
An opportunity.
As an opportunity. And how would you encourage them? How would you argue that this actually is a competitive advantage?
Well, the discussions I had with two major clients this year was exactly about that. So part of my job is advertising a data-centric security approach. And what I mean by that is protect data when you create it and only unprotected when ultimately necessary. Like you have a credit card credit card number, you protect it when it's generated, and only if the monthly billing or a payment has to be done, you decrypt it so that the operation can happen. All the way in between, it's always protected. If that kind of data is stolen through a breach, through a hack, through accident, whatever, it doesn't matter because it is protected. It's encrypted, right? So that's part of my role. And I've two major clients here in Switzerland where they understood that what they are doing has so much value for their customers that they now both publicly speak about it, which is not common. Typically in the IT security space, you don't talk about the security measures that you have taken, because if the attacker knows what you do, yada, 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 right? Both of them have, in the meantime, publicly spoken about what they do with us, and they see that as their responsibility to advertise the importance of protecting client data in that case, and be a role model for a whole industry. So yes, but it's the majority of companies is not yet seeing that edge, that it's actually a competitive advantage and not a regulation hurdle.
So from a consultant point of view, how to make it simpler for them to see it? That edge, the competitive edge, not the problem, the opportunity.
I'm not sure if they were aware that they had this competitive edge doing it using a data-centric approach. It was part of my discussions with them that I tried to make them aware about the role they play in today's environment. And I guess, as I said, talking about security is always something where customers typically have all kind of reasons why not to. But they actually took that twist and turned around and saw the advantage that it can bring. And I'm pretty sure that going forward, you will see more and more companies that will publicly talk about the way how they protect data. It's end of the day, it's a question of trust that their customers can have into their supplier. And again, we are talking about this third-party supplier thing, where next to contracts and technical measures, trust is a key element.
Yeah, I would hope so. Yeah, I mean, usually the only time we hear a business talk about its privacy or its security policies is after there has been a breach or a problem or a lawsuit. And that's a matter of rescuing its reputation. But to actually,
by the way, on that Microsoft Chaos DB vulnerability thing, Microsoft absolutely acted appropriately. I mean, everyone can be hit by such a vulnerability. Everyone. DevSecOps is not where it should be. But then it's all about how you react. So Microsoft paid the $40,000 to the company that detected the vulnerability. They have a bounty program where you're incentivized if you find a vulnerability, and first announce it to the vendor, give them time to respond, a couple of days, and then make it public. Right? So all of that was really following the book and was absolutely perfectly managed. It's not perfect that it happened, but it was at least perfectly managed.
Right.
And again, that's a question of trust, right? I mean, Microsoft is definitely one of the companies where security plays a major role.
In contrast to the conduct of T-Mobile here, the affected ones still don't know whether they are affected or not.
T-Mobile in the US.
Here in the US,
Yeah, they still are under surveillance, as they typically American in this case blame somebody else for showing wrong figures, and not justifying the proper amount of data which has been taken and what quality of data it is. Such is,
right.
if the one who is stealing it claims he has everything, and the one who has been stolen the data says it's not so harmful as you think. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't want to defend T-Mobile, nor do I want to say anything about that case because I'm not too familiar with it. But the one thing that is in common is that those that are stealing data and are trying to blackmail a company have a huge interest in making it public as soon as possible and making it look like as big as possible, because then they expect a return as big as possible, right? And so I don't trust those that steal data and then inform the public about the amount of data that they have. I rather trust the victim in that picture. And but again, every company deals with these threats differently.
Yeah. So still there's an expectation of being informed. Hey, you are a customer.
Yeah.
There has been a data breach. The data breach had amount XYZ.
Mm-hmm.
As per our current knowledge, this is the set of data that got exposed. There may or may not be critical data in it. I don't care at this moment. And as per our current knowledge, you are affected or not. This is the bare minimum that I would have expected. And so
yes, and 1 second later, you get exactly the same email with click here to change your password. So yes, I completely agree. There's an obligation to inform customers if there was a breach, right? It's even a legal obligation that you have to inform. It's a question if you have to do it via email or via news or via website, whatever. But even those things are immediately misused by people that run all kind of phishing attacks and try to get the next level.
Well, do it the German way. Send a paper.
Yeah, or telefax, very famous.
Yeah. No,
as the mail drafts are out of order.
Kind of information. Yeah. And this is the
completely,
thing of
I'm
conduct.
completely with you.
So that we are talking trust. Yeah. Basically trust. And this is what basically I would have expected. But anyways, instead of continuing to whine a little, there's one.
Have you been breached, Thomas?
There is, before you continue, you had an answer to, you placed a question. How far is DSGVO, GDPR in progress? And I wanted to answer that the whole time I was looking for the right slide from the Bitkom, which is a reliable source. And that one, that is a statement which is from September, October last year. And if we check this against their latest data on how is it after 1 year, which I love to share in a minute, it is also very critical to reflect that that's opening now. They saw it not as always an advantage, but on the left side, you see that some companies in European organizations are claiming that GDPR on their standards is to their advantage with 62%, you can see here. Yeah. And but they also claim in that survey that a lot of challenges arose for innovation due to the proper, let's say, utilization of GDPR laws. But hence we can discuss on that, and we'll stop screening, but sharing the screen. But I think it's important to realize that there are still a lot of organizations which are not yet there. And this is not to my liking. And
no, that's not the message of this slide. The message of this slide is 2/3. Oh, please leave it so that we can leave it on screen.
Yeah, okay.
2/3 are seeing GDPR now as a competitive advantage. When doing business with other countries. So that's great because that will stimulate certainly some behavior. And then the right part of it is saying, whenever trying to bring in new technologies in your company, what is the biggest hurdle? And then 79% say data privacy, right? And I think that's a twofold. That has nothing to do with the implementation of data privacy processes and tools and all of that stuff. That is on the one hand side an easy excuse why something is not working as expected or cannot be introduced. And on the other side, the majority of new technologies that are implemented in companies are cloud-based. And the majority of cloud-based technologies are coming from the US. And the majority of cloud-based US providers have not yet done anything around GDPR and the little conflict with what is called the Cloud Act, which ultimately grants US jurisdiction access to data wherever it sits on the planet, right? And all of a sudden, that number totally makes sense, from my point of view.
Yeah. Follow up to that one. In my consulting, I often hear arguments in favor of data must reside in the EU, ideally in Germany, because
ideally in my own house.
Yeah, well, they are cloud aware meanwhile, so that's okay. So might be they are cloud affine, which is okay, which is fine actually. So they now say that because of GDPR, it must be in the EU. Now they then tend to choose hosting it on AWS or Microsoft or, well, an IBM cloud or Oracle cloud, whatever it is. Under the auspices of the Cloud Act, what would you say to them? Isn't that a bit short-sighted then, with that argument?
It's a crazy world that we live in.
That's true, yeah.
There's a great technology, which is called cloud computing, where one of the key arguments for cloud computing is it is global, right? It doesn't, well, beyond global. It doesn't need to rely on the infrastructure of a single country. It's like fault tolerant. If a country goes offline, it's still there, right?
Exactly.
It's great. It's wonderful. But at the same time, you have to acknowledge that you completely lose control over your own data if you just go into the cloud without any prevention measures, right? Interestingly enough, all of the major cloud vendors say, well, we treat your data as the most important thing. We will not give it away to any legal investigators if not necessary. There's always this very last sentence, right? There are 500 marketing pages saying, we'll take care of your data as much as we can with all of the effort that we can afford, and page 500 is, well, if we are legally required, we have to give it away. But then you see that tendency that customers say, well, we would go to the cloud if the cloud only is in our home country, which works fine for Germany. The major players have all of their data centers in Germany, and you can sign contracts that the data is always kept in Germany. Maybe a backup is kept in the Netherlands or in Ireland or in Singapore. That can narrow it down to the country. Now, currently I'm in Switzerland. Switzerland is a little bit smaller, and therefore some of those major companies are struggling and calculating the use case. Does it really make sense to have a data center in Switzerland? Now they are starting to have them in Switzerland. I mean, we have some global companies here that are doing a lot of business with these large vendors, and therefore all of a sudden you see data centers in Switzerland. So I'm wondering what the next step is. If Liechtenstein, which is a village on a little hill, like an hour driving away from here, if they will shout and say, oh, would like to have a Liechtenstein, Microsoft, Amazon, whatever, Google Cloud, will they get their own data center? I think the answer has to be completely different to that approach. The answer has to be thinking about a concept that gives back control to the customer that owns the data. It's not an easy one. It's nothing that you can double-click, set up exe, and you're done. But think about, you have a way that protects your data before you store it in the cloud, or it protects the data in the cloud, but you still own the protection technology. And that protection works in a way that it is not impacting business functionality, because then it's useless. Then all of a sudden, you own the protection mechanism, you own the keys to your data, and you could use whatever cloud you want, wherever you want. All of a sudden, because if you do certain of these large players, if you go and use only their German cloud, for example, you pay a 25% premium, but you only get 80% of the functionality, interestingly enough, right? That's not what you want. You want to have the full breadth of their solution, but you want to stay in control of your data. And there are these concepts available, data-centric security concepts, that you could work like that. It's just a question, like with every other new technology. Do you know it? What is your experience with it? I mean, we live in a region where PKI implementations have been ongoing for 20 years, unsuccessful, costed an awful lot of money. And if I come around the corner and say, guys, here's an encryption technology that protects your formats, and you can still work with all of your applications, no matter on-prem and in the cloud, well, the first reaction is, young man, those 20 years of unsuccessful PKI, no way, right? We never touch encryption again. But I haven't seen any other concept that is convincing me that helps customers and allows customers to really stay in control of the data. The majority of products that I see in that space are detecting that you lost data, put it that way. Data loss prevention solutions, Casper solutions, all kinds of solutions that monitor data and where it flows to. But if data went off to another place, it's already too late, right? You need to go back one step and think about protect first, and then you can still monitor. But then it doesn't matter if somebody stole your data without the keys; they are blind.
May I phrase a question in? Sorry, Marshall, if you have one, go first.
No, not at all. You go ahead.
I was concerned on medical data. I have overheard or heard that in the United States, after several severe breaches last year, in some, let's say, states in the US, in the health system, they have rethought their policy of getting data in public clouds. Would you have here additional information on such as they go back into secure private clouds, or do they encrypt?
Define secure private cloud as compared to private cloud.
Yeah.
I'm happy to define it after Michael has answered the question.
Let me start the other way around. There's no need to have a look at what the US is doing in the medical space. If you take the example of the Netherlands, where a member of the royal family was in a ziekenhuis, in a Dutch hospital, and someone from the medical staff who was not part of the team dealing with that member of the royal family had access, because there were no access management rules, guidelines in place. Everyone had access to everything, right? And then sold it to the press. And afterwards, again, they monitored it. Afterwards, they figured out that more than 100 employees of the hospital actually reviewed the royal family members' medical record.
I remember that story. Yeah.
I mean, it's like 2 years ago. So these things are happening all around the globe. The advantage of some of the US medical centers is they are by far earlier adopting new technologies than good old German hospitals would do until Krankenkasse is paying something, right? The health insurance. And so they are benefiting from an awful lot of advantages of connected medical infrastructures. The interaction between patient, local doctor, hospital, specialist,
pharmacy.
It's mainly digital, right? And I'm completely a big fan of that, because the majority of wrong treatments in our region here is because your local doctor has not shared the full picture with the specialist has not shared the full picture with the guy that is doing the operation, and all of a sudden you lost the left foot and it was the right foot, right? It's like, it's these things that drive me crazy. At the same time, you need to rethink your strategy on how you protect those data. I'm currently working with a couple of vendors for medical devices, X-ray systems, CT systems, all these kind of systems. They are now not only creating the imaging and then printing the image like in the past, it's now digitally stored somewhere and everyone needs access. And they are now thinking about, how do we make those pictures, diagnosis documents, and all of that, patient records, available in a secure manner? Only hospital internal, across hospitals and local doctors, and ultimately also, how do we make that available to the patient? If you see that in Germany, we are talking about Gesundheitskarte, a little digital ID card that contains your basic medical information. That was a project, I think it was 10 billion euro that they already spent, and it's still not there. It's still not implemented for everyone.
It's a joke. It's like you could walk with a USB stick around. The chip is like mimicry. Yeah.
Yes. If you see that the majority of local doctors are running Wi-Fi routers that are not protected, and you just need to sit in a cafe next to it to read patient records. There was a famous hack last year for a very famous router type where you could do that and then access patient records data. There is globally a huge need to protect these super sensitive data, right? And at the same time, there's a huge need to connect more information and faster in order to fight certain diseases. In East Germany, they had on paper a central records management for cancer. So in East Germany, they knew exactly why and where people were suffering from cancer, where in West Germany, decentralized until today, there is no central register for people that have cancer, so that you can't really figure out, is it an environmental topic, you're living close to a nuclear plant, or is it because of X, Y, Z, right? I mean, there's so much that you get out of data collection and big data analysis in the medical space. That is, it would be a shame to leave that on the table. Again, going back to the data-centric approach, why on earth do you need name and first name and address for it? You maybe need the zip code, the region where someone lives. You need the age and the sex, and that's it, right? The rest of the private information you don't need to run these kind of big data analysis.
Yeah.
So then it's a question, for example, for these use cases, how do you protect those sensitive data before you store them in a centralized platform for big data analysis? And all of that is available and possible, but then the question is, who wants to pay for it?
I would like to go back to one screen I would like to share, as it is talking about the aspect of the challenges we have with the GDPR, and that a lot of organizations are very concerned about the, let's say, the legal state and what are the unsecurity in what is case by law that there are a lot of changes and adoptions, and that there is not enough help for the organizations through the public or the state and the not the state as the German Federal Republic, but like North Rhine-Westphalia, Saarland, and the smaller ones, and in Berlin, as they have their own interpretation and the right of interpretation, how some of the measures are taken.
Germany has 16 states and 16 state data protection officers. And all 16 have their view on GDPR and how strict or non-strict they are handling it. Part of the problem on the first major item, which is we are not sure if we meet the requirements, has also to do that the first 2 years you saw a broad discussion about no, it's our legitimate interest that we handle those data because we need that to operate our company. So that was the excuse for we do business as we did before, not changing anything because we have to. I'm not sure, but I think the term is legitimate interest.
Yeah.
In still progressing with it, right? Now it took roughly 2 years until some judges said, F word, your legitimate interest. It's not legitimate. You have to follow GDPR guidelines. And that is something where all of a sudden there is now a wake-up call, and it perfectly makes sense from a timing perspective. The level of uncertainty has risen by 6% from 2019 to 2020 because 2020 was the year when legitimate interest was no longer legitimate, right? And you really had to go and follow the guidelines. I find more interesting that the amount of qualified people that you need is no longer such a big topic, only 26% compared to 37%. That is an opposite number of what I see in real life. I think it is less that you really find qualified employees. It's more that we need a volunteer and to handle GDPR and be the DPO for our organization. And those that were on vacation or off sick, they were volunteered to do the job, right? So in other words, the job positions are filled. Are it always the most qualified people for that role? I doubt.
Follow-up question to Rolf. So when I look at the first two ones, I am hard-pressed to not laugh because as per my knowledge, the GDPR hasn't been changed since it got passed. And
2016, 5 years.
Yeah, right, hasn't been changed at all, which renders the first 2 points quite obsolete, right? Or why can this uncertainty be that high with a law that hasn't been changed at all? And that is, well, from my non-lawyer perspective, written pretty clearly.
So hundreds of lawyers have started interpreting GDPR and have tried to find the holes in it. And legitimate interest was the only real hole that they could find. And it wasn't actually a hole.
Sorry, what was that?
Legitimate interest was perceived as that might be the hole that you can in the regulation that it can misuse, and it was tried to be misused, but that hole is closed now. It was never there, and it has now been made clear that it was never there.
Yeah. So why then these 2 points? I mean, that's
what do you mean?
Complete BS, isn't it?
The first and the second,
if you believe that legitimate interest, if you believe that legitimate interest allows you to continue to work with customer, client, and personal data as you did before, you don't need to change anything. If that argument goes away, all of a sudden you really have to deal with the topic, and then you have to do all the changes.
There. So if you're reading the preamble of the whole law, then you say that legitimate interest is although a catch-all, a very limited area. So it's not a legitimate, which brings me actually then later on to a follow-up question, because you said who owns the data. I would argue that most of the companies do not own the data that they collect. It's my data and yours, Ralph's. They just hold it.
Yes, I fully agree with that.
Yeah,
I like that view.
Means that looking a little further, that brings us directly to third-party cookies and the likes. Yeah, all those data collections that are happening. What's your view on browser makers restricting the use of third-party cookies and Google's reaction with this FLOC?
The FLOC nonsense, yeah. It's
okay,
like,
that answers.
Let me take a different spin on this one. We are all manipulated by what we see in our browsers. The question is only to what degree do we allow it to be manipulated? There was a great documentary last night on German television where a reporter undercover simulated that he is working for a German party, now in preparation of the next big election that we have, and was seeking advice and help from 10 companies, London-based companies, on how to manipulate masses, right? We're not talking on how to manipulate few individuals. It was like, how do we move the party from being a below 5% to under 5%? Well, that's not possible, but to a major party. And 3 of those 10 companies responded to his request. He was filming that undercover, and it was absolutely shocking. It is basically, you go there, you say what kind of message do you want to transport, and you do it, right? And they have super simple messages so that people can quickly understand, copy, paste, through WhatsApp, through Facebook, through every social media channel they are using. I mean, these were for the old guys, right? The younger generation is using some TikTok, Clubhouse, whatever, Club Sandwich thing. And it is just frightening. And it's a whole industry where the only purpose is, how can I measure and analyze user behavior of people that are using a browser in order to advertise more specific to their needs, right? If it would be me, I would forbid all of that, and they can book banners like you could book advertisements in newspapers, and that's it. No more targeted something. I hate it. I just hate it.
That could really ruin a complete industry, such as the real-time customer journey orchestration.
I'm fully aware of that, Ralph, and I wouldn't mind.
I perfectly understand, as long as you can sell your encryption.
It's probably a question of age. If you would ask my kids that are in their early 20s about that, they have a completely different view on that. Interesting, right? And they, by the way, people of our age, so 35 plus, if I see you, some of them need education on all of these topics. They don't believe that it's happening. They believe it's a free and fair election, and I have all of the options to build up my mind with all kind of facts, and they completely underestimate on how much manipulation is going on, right? Even in German elections. Those kids in their early 20s, they are fully aware of it. They know about the power of social media because every one of them has experienced mobbing at school, for example, right? Yeah. One way or the other. They know exactly how it can be used to manipulate the view of other people.
Yeah, I would say that all you need for proof is to look at American politics the past several years. But unfortunately, the people who have been manipulated still don't think that they have been.
So, I guess they haven't seen the documentary on Netflix about social media and manipulation, where Cambridge Analytica was just the tip of the iceberg, and that Palantir and what is standing behind a very conservative church followers which have been utilized the former president as a little stakeholder for their interest, but behind there is a complete managed industry which is so powerful and have their own agenda that I'm really concerned that there will be no revolution by guns. It will be a silent revolution by data, let's say, utilization and misuse, my assumption, which comes to the point of DORA. Because
the flip side of that, Ralph, is actually that you see, after we had a World Wide Web, which is now, I guess, 30 years old,
bit more,
we are now going back to geographical wide web, right? I mean, China is talking about, we have our own thing, certain data is not allowed to leave the country at all, certain data is not allowed to get into the country. Russia talking about the same thing, some other countries as well. So the separation of the internet as we know it today into multiple geolocations, geo-fenced locations is progressing at light speed, right? Was that the idea? No, it wasn't, right? And if you saw that documentary last night, the references that those companies had were, well, we worked for Russia, Pakistan, Iraq, China, and they were like kind of we helped this dictator to find out the people that went on the streets and showed the anti-dictator posters, right? It's like, do I really want to work together with such a company?
No. Honestly, no. And I would like to know, as the abbreviation of DOAR, you just drive along. Yeah.
Digital Operational Resilience Act.
Okay.
So it's all about digital operation. That's what you do day in, day out with your IT, on-prem and in the cloud. Third-party suppliers and all of that. I mean, third-party supplier is a great topic in GDPR because they have to follow the same rules, right? You quite frequently, if you have a large organization where you buy a product, you get support from all around the globe. So 24/7, you get support. But there are a lot of those locations that are outside of your European zone, and therefore, most of the times companies don't have proper contracts internally in place. They are seen as a third party. All of a sudden, you have a supplier, you raise a support ticket, and a third party is accessing your data to solve your problem, right? So that's a GDPR problem already. And one of the key things where DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act, will come into play is think about how dependent you will be from your third-party supplier. I mean, we have seen that in the non-digital world in the past 18 months, not only due to COVID, but when that little ship Evergreen was grounded in one of the channels, and all of a sudden all supply chains broke down because one ship was on hold, or shipments couldn't be made because factories were locked in lockdown, and all of a sudden we are talking about, I mean, whatever I try to buy these days, it's like, oh yeah, we have 4 to 6 months delivery time. We are no longer used to it. We are used to supply chain like a power plug, a power outlet in your wall, right? It's always on, always there. And now all of a sudden I have to wait for things. I bought a wall box for an electrical car, and it will arrive in 6 months.
Yeah, but
by then the battery will be
different
empty.
Reasons than privacy and the likes. This was just in quotes a flawed matrix that was used for optimizing the supply chain, which is price, make it cheap. Yeah, so not making it resilient, which is a bit more expensive. Yeah. So
business resilience is the topic, Thomas.
Yeah, but not privacy. Business resilience is and privacy are different topics. They have an overlap, but not more. I think the overlap is rather small.
And if we can chase or go for the point that one can do a proper business, can keep his business up and healthy, and not be greedy on collecting data and delivering a high security and trust for its customers, and the data they deliver to them as trusted organization, then we come to the point that we get in a protective mode, that we are stronger against attacks from the outside, from criminals or institutions which are called security agencies or services.
Or Cambridge Analytics.
All these guys, because you hate me today because I share so much, but that one is an interesting, such as I found it more than shocking that we have been under so many attacks during the pandemic time, and that it has risen so much that a lot of smaller organizations now realize how easy they can be touched. And in some other statements Tom and I delivered for Zoho, for instance, we made the quotes that OB, Lidl, Edeka, and those were suddenly under attack and were victims of criminal data kidnapping and was heißt Erpressung?
Blackmailing.
Thank you. Blackmailing in large amounts, and they had a standstill in their complete organizations. Yeah.
So I like this chart because it shows progress. A few years ago, I was talking about 50-50. 50% of the companies know that they had a breach, a cyber attack or something like that, and 50% had it but don't know it. Now, 9 out of 10 know it, and there's only 1 left who had it but doesn't know it. So huge improvement.
You can't act on something you don't know, right? Totally different topic. We are well past the hour. What's your timeline today?
I have no further appointments today.
Okay, so we continue till tomorrow morning.
Yeah, I guess 8:30 is my next call tomorrow morning.
Tomorrow morning Pacific time, of course.
No Central European time, so we have only 8 hours and 28 minutes left. Oh, sorry. 12 hours. I can't even make up numbers. It's 12 hours and 28 minutes. I'm confused.
Getting back to the data ownership part, and what would you advise companies to collect and how to use it, and when to collect,
and how much?
Looking at the situation that it's getting breached anyways. Yeah, this is what it is, right? The only consequence can only be simple-minded that I am, have as little as possible.
My
I would appreciate that.
It's easier to control with
that approach, and I guess the need to know principle is something that I absolutely like, right? You only collect what you really need to know in order to do your business. Unfortunately, the opposite is true, and everyone believes the more I collect about an individual, the better I can service this customer, right? If you go and whatever, you register for an online shop for wine, they'll ask you about the car that you drive. I had that recently this week. And I was like, car driving, wine drinking, there's a mismatch in itself, but why on earth do you, right?
No, it's not.
And I don't know.
Why, Michael? Let me tell you why this is not a mismatch. First, they now know that you are running an SUV, so you have a big trunk. Means they can sell you several crates of wine. Then they do know
It's
it's a
delivered by the
G-Wagon,
post anyway.
it's an AMG 5, an AMG G-Wagon, which means that you are fond of the expensive wine, so they sell you a crate of the expensive wine and not of the cheap stuff.
So I'm not driving a taxi. I'm driving a different vendor, which I really, really like. I'm not sharing that I'm driving BMW. Yeah. So what I wanted to say is actually, my observation in a lot of companies is that for whatever reasons, you try to collect as much as possible data from your customers, put that into systems that are called customer insight or intelligence systems, and then you believe you can run all kind of analytics on it in order to figure out what might be the next product that customers will just buy if we only could offer it. But also my experience is that the majority of data that is collected is not even used.
I think that's been the case for a very long time.
Yes, and that hasn't changed. Right? And so, again, the need to know principle is that's it.
Do the companies know what they need to know?
Most of them, yes. If you can't issue an invoice, you know that you haven't had enough information collected, right? It's
yeah. Do they know what's too much? On the other end, that's the real question.
Again, no, and again, it's different departments inside companies. You have the procurement, billing department, but you also have marketing. And marketing would love to have and I completely understand why, as targeted campaigns as possible. And in order to be as targeted as possible with your marketing approach, you need to have as much data as possible. Again, I always question, is it really used or is it just stored?
As much
and I'm not a big fan of that.
Not as much as possible. I mean, it's the same argumentation as with big data, right? So actually, they don't want to have big data, but they collected the whole stuff because they didn't know where the needle in the haystack is, right? Hence the question, do they know what they need to know? And how to make them know what they need to know?
I mean, obviously, they hire consultants like us.
Yeah, that's why you need expensive consultants to answer those very tricky questions. I've seen all types of organization. I recently had an industrial company that I was working with. Their data protection officer had a super brilliant, clear view on what requires protection and what not. That doesn't necessarily mean that this guy knew what is relevant to run the business to have the data, but at least he knew what to protect and what not to protect, right? But it's one of those that we probably can't answer, and therefore it's ultimately more important to at least know what you have to protect. What is personal identifiable information, customer identifiable information, and how can I ensure that it's not misused or getting in the wrong hands? And therefore, what is your protection strategy in order to deal with those?
Well, isn't it that given that you have enough of it, it's all the combination makes it PII?
That's a very valid point as well, and most people underestimate what is PII. A number plate is as much PII as a social security number, a name, an address, a fragment of, etc. An IP address is classified as PII. And protecting like 8 out of 15 arguments will still make it possible to recalculate who is the original person behind it. So it's really difficult to get to the point where you have proper protection.
Yeah, which was one of the main flaws behind FLOC, right? The other one obviously being Amazon having an own scenario, so not buying into FLOC, but that's the other one. But how to?
But isn't it great how data privacy plays a major role in advertisement? You get a new super duper megaphone, mega telephone from one of the big vendors, and the number one argument in every super duper advertorial is data privacy. Right? We take data privacy to the next level. What they are trying to tell you is now we are able to crawl your pictures on your phone to figure out if you're a pedophile or not, which is something where nobody would say, no, I'm against something like that, catch all of them and do whatever. But reality is, all of a sudden you have a vendor that believes they have the investigation license to crawl data on your private device. I'm not sure if that is data privacy or if that is just the opposite.
No, that's not privacy.
Oh, I am sure, yes.
However, the other major one, the real major one, is doing it all the time since its inception. Just that they are not touting privacy. So,
yeah.
I mean, it's their business model, right? So, but actually, what's your take on the previous and the announcement they made before? So we are talking Apple here, right? The first one. Their earlier announcement about making it mandatory for app vendors to expose what is taken or grabbed by the app in detail, and to give the option of disapproving that.
I mean, we're talking about something here that maybe I can share something at one point as well.
Yeah.
If I only find
you
it.
just have to push to the right button. Otherwise you kill yourself. That would be
I just have to find
bad.
it.
Don't use the red one with the white X. Which would be the right button.
Now you scared me a little.
Just a little. That's typical.
It's okay, it's painless.
Hey, Michael, you're a man of the middle, so take a middle button. Not the right one.
I just need to find it. No, I mean, we are talking about something here where I have no idea how to translate Geiz ist geil. There was a slogan in German advertisement for quite some time, which basically means cheap is the best, something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so people don't understand the price they pay for a for free application.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah,
you see exactly the same behavior. So where's share? There's share. Share screen. You see exactly the same behavior when we talk about Facebook and these things.
There we are, add to stream.
So what you're saying, I think, is if you're getting it for free, then you are the product.
Yeah. Well, social engineering is actually the point at the bottom line, right?
So here we're talking about how people think they are hacked, right? And then the same people answer all of these questions in Facebook, not getting the point that this is just a huge data collection engine that is compiling those information. You have a unique identifier, and they know exactly that you, Ralph, your first car where you passed your driver's test in was a Volkswagen Golf, most likely. You name a song, Yellow Submarine, and all of a sudden, we are talking about an elderly person, most likely wearing glasses, yada, 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 and then all the magic starts where you can, having 10, 20, 30 of those arguments and criteria, you have a super duper picture about that person, about the behavior. And then we are back to that documentary about what might be the party that Ralph is electing in September, and how can we influence that to be maybe a little less harmful.
Well, I can tell you which party I would elect if the German government would be fast enough to allow me to. But the consequences, I won't elect any, but anyways.
So living in the US and waiting still for the election papers.
Of course. Because they are sending them by snail mail. Probably by ship.
Environmental friendly with a sailing boat, but
yeah, might even be.
By the time frame, I agree.
Yes. And then, well, then it's still on the wrong side of the continent, so they need a messenger, probably on horse.
Pony Express will manage. Yeah. Trust them.
So, yeah, Wells Fargo in its origins.
The severe, let's say, challenges are coming through backmailing, and that we have now 223 billion euros in, let's say, negative effects or loss per year through cyber criminals and the effects which are caused by all that. So the standard contract clauses, on the one end, a more clear view on that you have to do something on your security in your organizations, and what you said, the DORA as a new upcoming law would be the interesting combination. I would try to start up wrapping up what we had in the last 1.25 hours. What is your thought and what is your advice as an expert? How you can get out of that challenge if you are a user of an American-driven providing service and you do not trust the standard, the SCC clauses?
That's a big question. So let me start with an easy answer on the slide that you shared, so that gives me some thinking time. The ransomware part, talking about resilience, why on two aspects? Why on earth are there still companies paying to those organizations? I'm not aware of too many or any case where you paid and then you got the key to decrypt stuff again. Kind of bullshit.
Interesting, right? Observation.
Never pay, please. Number one. Number two, if all of your machines are affected and are accidentally by ransomware encrypted, why bother? Nuke all of the machines and play back the latest backup. You lose maybe a half a day, 2 days of data, whatever. But I mean, that is a principle that should be adhered to since ages, that you have proper backups of all of your systems, multiple backups in best case. It drives me mad, right? I've seen organizations in Germany having 300 consultants to bring back 16,000 PCs into a state that the company could continue to work. We're talking several months. Those consultants, by the way, got those army beds and were sleeping inside the offices. But that's, yeah, enough of horror stories. I don't get it, right? I mean, have a proper backup plan, and manage your devices, and you're fine. Plus, there's all kind of technology that prevents you from ransomware in the first place. Right? Great cloud-based providers, for example, that can do all of that. And still companies are, I'm not getting it. So back to your question with the standard contract clause. I'm not sure if standard contract clauses are the silver bullet for all of the problems. Legally, they are probably the last resource that you have. But I've seen some of those contracts where the standard contract clauses have been embedded in. And I wonder if those people in procurement and legal people at customers really understand the hundreds of pages that they sign. I'm not too sure they do. Some of these projects are rushed, either because the vendor has quarter end and pushes you to finally sign it, or you have the business pressuring you and saying, we really need this product, finally make the deal. Because if you would apply what you, well, now it's not a good example. If you buy a car or sign up for insurance today, you don't read all of those 50 pages that you get as an individual. Right. I rarely see people that do that. And those people that do it, I don't want to have a party with them. So that's a species that, I mean, going through these contracts, right? So standard contract clauses are accepted. They are legally a great solution. But it means an individual contract between every customer and the vendor, which is something that is not going to work. You need to have a better, broader way to do business, even on a global scale. There need to be regulations that both parties adhere to. There is a flaw in the Brazilian GDPR variant. LGPD is the acronym, I guess, and if they say if the country that you are dealing with has a higher standard than your original country, then you don't need to worry for doing business with it, which is an interesting approach. I'm not sure if it really works that way, but the idea of two countries that at least can agree on a minimum acceptable level of data privacy regulations, and then everyone can differentiate above that, but never below that. That should be kind of the solution.
True. Yeah, makes it easier.
And I think those negotiations are underway, and currently.
On which levels? Between the EU and the US, or on which?
Yeah,
level?
EU, US after Schrems 2 and the whole privacy shield dilemma and everything that comes with it. I'm pretty sure that there's currently negotiations underway.
Wasn't privacy shield a kind of a not so shieldish thing anyways? Like
the Patriot Act, like the Cloud Act. You can take all of those laws and they are like great acronyms. Great acronyms. Like Cloud Act was the Clarifying Lawful Overseas Use of Data Act. I mean, they are genius. Those guys that come up with these acronyms. I think you can throw them a word and they create a law. It's fantastic.
Just needs an AI.
They are simply legalizing not marijuana in that case, but theft of data for their own utilization, by state.
Also legalize IT,
Okay.
This okay is normally when he wraps up.
No, when I suggest to wrap up.
Good idea.
When have we ever said no, we're not going to wrap up?
I mean, it's one of the longer ones we had so far. So,
but honestly,
I'm getting hungry and thirsty.
Okay,
that's a very good reason to change focus.
My part of saying goodbye is I just want to encourage the audience, as that survey from only Bitkom, which is not internationally, just Germany driven, showed up that cyber attacks will rise and that they will touch especially the critical infrastructure sectors, and not only them, but also the ones which are not named yet critical infrastructures. So watch your back, turn around who is collecting your data, and trust more or rely on partners which show you openly that they do something more in keeping your privacy private, and do care that your data is taken care of, not to the advantage of services.
Or advertisement agencies.
Or advertising agencies.
Or vendors.
Kind of.
All right, guys, it's been a pleasure as always. Have a wonderful evening and a great week.
We appreciate very much, and we are grateful that you spent this 1.5 hours with us. Thank you very much, Michael. Highly appreciate it.
And informative and enjoyable.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Take care, guys.
Thanks. So let's go offline. or offline into the back room